this game has tons of vague and confusing lore that is significantly up to interpretation, we're going to focus on what we do know. Long ago, something called an outer god, specifically this one known as the Greater Will, sent his lovely daughter, the Mother of Fingers, plummeting on a shooting star down to the lands between. It also sent, probably very much later on, a star carrying something called the Elden Beast. The Mother of Fingies is essentially a Discord server owner. Or you see, she would then go on to bestow the lands with the most horrifying motherfuckers you will ever witness. A bunch of fingers in the form of two main types. Finger creepers, which are just trying to finger people, I guess, and then the two fingers, which are basically Discord moderators who are dished out to be the guides and translate the words and wisdom of Daddy Greater Will, or maybe just the Mother's Will, who was informed by Daddy Greater Will. I don't know, but the two fingers were trying to communicate to the inhabitants of the lands between. Now, on the other hand, the Elden Beast, the thing that presumably came on a later shooting star, would eventually become the Elden Ring, which isn't exactly a ring as you and I understand those circular metal things you plop on your fingies. The Elden Ring is more like an extremely powerful item that creates order, or in other words, if the lands between itself was a video game, the Elden Ring would dictate the ability to change the settings of that game, like Minecraft's difficulty setting or Ark's XP harvest and taming multipliers. You want to remove the ability for people to die permanently in the lands between? Uncheck this funny little destined death box, and suddenly you've just disabled dying, allowing people to respawn. Hopefully that illustrates what the Elden Ring actually is, because it took me a good while to understand it. It's not really a ring, it's a rule set. So this Elden Ring is here now. What happened to it? Who used it? Well, first what we know is that a race of dragons used the Elden Ring. For an entity to command the ring and to a degree become one with it, they had to become a god. Not in the sense that an outer god is a god, just a regular god by this definition. Then they needed what we call an Elden Lord. It's almost like Star Wars with the Sith and their rule of two. Needless to say, the first Elden Lord that we're aware of was a dragon called Placidusax. His god was a dragon god that we don't really know anything about, just that it had to exist and that he essentially served it. The god is the one who serves or embodies the Elden Ring, and the Elden Lord is the one who serves said god, protects them, and ensures the order or configuration of the ring remains as the god intends for it to be. The Greater Will, on the other hand, just seemed to want some kind of order for the ring. They don't necessarily care about which order it is, just that there is an order at all. It's almost like the Greater Will is a server provider company, and the eventual gods that create orders are server owners. All the peasant players just kind of have to deal with the configuration the owner sets, and said owners could be open or closed-minded to suggestions in changing that order. Just hope to God that your outer god isn't Metrado, or you're f***ed either way. Beyond simplifying these abstract concepts to analogies of the modern video game industry, what happened next with these ancient dragons? Accompanying the dragons were also a race of beastmen, which were given exceedingly high intelligence, wisdom that actually was beyond humanity's later intelligence. How they got this insanely high intelligence, nobody knows, but they used it to create tools and weapons and build the monolithic structure of Farum Azula, what seemed to be both a burial site and an actual city for the dragons and the beastmen. These beastmen appeared to go through multiple phases of technological advancement, like the Stone Age, and eventually having access to metals like iron. Now, while the beastmen are just kind of vibing, the dragons, as it would turn out, were kind of having some drama. Placidusax was fighting with another dragon, or some kind of wyvern, and a really nasty one at that. Its name was Baal the Dread. The two had an insane fight and had mutually serious injuries dished to each other. At some point later on, the ancient and first Elden Lord, Placidusax, was abandoned by his god, and so he was just like, alright, I guess I'll just get locked behind time and just wait for my god to return. So that he did. Whether he did it himself or some other force locked him away in time, I don't know. A meteorite eventually struck the city of Farum Azula, and this may have been a reason why it suddenly began to float into the sky, where it was engulfed in a seemingly never-ending storm, which, in combination with the meteor's damage, crumbled the city apart. Placidusax didn't care about any of this, obviously, because he was just chilling in his time vacuum, though definitely pretty mortally wounded. Around this era, there appeared to be a dynasty civilization which we know little about. They may have been the first actual humans in the lands between, along with other kinds of entities like the Onyx and Alabaster Lords, which were like stone people. This marked the end of the ancient dragon's reign, since with Farum Azula floating and being torn apart, their god gone, and their Elden Lord just chilling beyond time, what were they supposed to do in order to continue the purpose of the Elden Ring? The dragons decided to migrate to the snowy part of the lands between. Said dragons' descendants would eventually become the kind of modern-day dragons, and early on in the timeline, they fought a war against the giants. See, the modern-day dragons were residing in the snow until a race of fire giants came and said, "Nah, we're gonna live here now, it's dead. Goodbye." So the dragons were chased off and the giants settled in, where they would come to create smithing, or a giant version of smithing. They created a giant forge, or cauldron, or whatever you want to call this thing, which housed a powerful flame called the Flame of Ruin, a very strong flame, mind you. Around this time also, there were human astrologers that had an early society and were effectively just hanging out in the snowy mountains with the giants, seemingly without conflict. On the other hand, the Zamor civilization also developed in the snow, and they hated the fire giants for some reason. Over time, the astrological civilization migrated down from the mountains to what would eventually become the Liurnian region. You might be wondering, by the way, who exactly is the Elden Lord right now, or the god for that matter, of the lands between? We don't have concrete evidence for that. All we know is that these civilizations of largely different humans developed and migrated around the landmass. They may have been in undocumented eras of Elden Ring configurations. But before we get into the Elden Ring configurations, it is pivotal that we talk about the Crucible. This is a term thrown around throughout the game with a disgusting amount of vagueness suffocating it. What we get hinted at throughout the game, especially in the Shadow of the Erdtree DLC, is that the Crucible is some kind of near incomprehensible essence by which life, divine or not, is able to be created from. Like a creative mode menu in Minecraft, but probably without the actual user interface because, well, this is an abstract fantasy concept. Whatever the Crucible looks or acts like, it seemed to be viewed by different cultures in different ways. For example, one particular culture known as the Hornsent people viewed it as a kind of spiral, and their architecture and accompanying items of worship towards the Crucible are seen as such, spiraling upwards towards the heavens. The Crucible also gave them horns, which they viewed as blessed and confirmed their belief that they were a chosen people. The Hornsent viewing themselves as a chosen people had some dire consequences for those around them, specifically those who weren't Hornsent.
I don't like where this is going.
Namely, the shaman people. See, the Hornsent were really into ritualistic sacrificial practices to appease what they thought was the Crucible, and so they actually started to massacre the shaman people since their flesh had a special property to meld harmoniously with others, and was thus good for being turned into a funny substance. They would torture these people, the shaman, and combine them together into big meatballs, and then stuff them into pots to become these saints, as they were deemed lower than the Hornsent, and I guess they just wanted any people around them to become higher beings by being inside of pots? So basically the Hornsent were like Nazi Germany, and I think you can figure out the rest of the analogy. By the way, all of this was taking place in what we can easily assume to have been part of the lands between at this point. Yes, this information has been confirmed in the Shadow of the Erdtree DLC, which takes place in the Realm of Shadow, but this Realm of Shadow definitely was not always enshrouded in shadow, so it must have been in some way connected to our main landmass, the lands between, with some theorizing that it literally occupied the same exact space, being right here in the middle of the other sort of like parts of the land. With that clarified, let's continue. So the Hornsent kept making meatballs out of the shaman people, and they were also working on this Divine Gateway project to create a god. They seem to be using the shaman people to make the jars, and as well as to make the portal or gateway itself. There's also these bodies that are attached to the sort of like spiraling castle structure, which is what the Divine Gateway rests on top of. We actually see this thing in game as basically being constructed with loads of bodies attached, like effigies. This portal was presumably going to be used to make their Empyrean, their chosen candidate for godhood, a god. Her name was Grandam. Eventually, throughout all of the atrocities these Hornsent people were committing, at some point one of the peasant shaman people named Marika had enough. We don't know when, but Marika one day managed to make contact with the Mother of Fingers, Matir. It is theorized that Marika was able to contact Matir because of one of these hollowed ruins that can be found right next to the actual shaman village that Marika came from. Multiple NPCs say that the one who rings the bell has their fate guided by the stars, or that they'll be cradled by the Exalted Mother. So presumably Marika rang the bell, met the Exalted Mother, Matir, and was then chosen as an Empyrean herself. Again, a candidate, but seemingly by this separate divine entity. On the other hand, whether the Fingers chose the other Empyrean, Grandam, or the Crucible and the Hornsent did, it's not really clear. Matir, having chosen Marika, was separate to anything to do with the Crucible and the Hornsent, but acted as a parallel to what they were doing. Marika, then being chosen, was set on her path to godhood, and here's where things get pretty fuzzy. Marika took note of everything here, right? The sacrifices, the Crucible, the whole let's create a god with this divine gateway shit. And I guess she was like, you know what? Why don't I become the god and create a version of the Crucible that is different from this one and doesn't involve sacrificing my people? So basically she did that. somehow. We see that in the story trailer for the Shadow of the Erdtree, Marika is walking up steps of corpses and makes it to this divine gateway we've been talking about after she pulls out some golden strands out of this fleshy hole of a corpse or something, and then from there, gold arose. She got to this point by seducing and betraying her way to the top. I have no idea how. I don't think anyone really knows how, but let's go with it. Also, it's important to clarify that as an Empyrean, Marika may have been given her shadow around this time, which was basically a companion to aid her in her potential ascendancy. In her case, it was this wolf guy named Malekith, which will come in later on. Anyway, after this gold arose and Marika did her weird ritual thing with the gateway, this seemed to create a fundamental landmass changing consequence for the lands between. We can assume there was at this point beginnings of something called the Erdtree, and something we refer to as the shadow of the Erdtree called the Scadutree. Was the Scadutree created alongside the Erdtree? Could the Scadutree just be the Crucible? So many questions, so few answers. So the Erdtree begins, and gold has risen. Oh yeah, and Marika's now a god. Focusing on the lands between, let's talk about a pivotal moment around when she became a god, which was that a city named Landale was founded and built around the now existing, albeit perhaps young, Erdtree. With Marika acting as the ruler or god and, representing order, this was now the age of the Erdtree conquest in the lands between. People weren't just going to accept the Erdtree without good reason, so Marika was about to make them understand. She needed some serious strength and an Elden lord specifically, so she married a barbarian named Horalu. This guy was an absolute tank, known for his strength and might makes right mentality. In order for him to chill out and not be as tyrannical as he had historically been, he decided to take who was once hailed as the Lord of Beasts, Sarash, onto his back, or in other words, a kind of sentient bottleneck for his rage, in the form of this weird spirit lion thing that essentially suppressed his lust for killing. Though Horalu was still dangerous because he's an insane barbarian. Nonetheless, when he made this change, I guess with it, he changed his name, which became Godfrey, the first Elden Lord, which, as you should remember, doesn't actually make him the first Elden Lord. We forget was it exact. Godfrey was determined to scour over the land, ensuring that all knew how important and powerful the Erdtree was. We know that in his conquest, he found the Storm Lord, which was known as the Stormhawk King, and was super powerful for its epic wind attack, which we really only hear about. A shame, really, because I would have loved to see that thing during its prime instead of being forced to settle with its presumed descendants, these horrible monstrosities that have knives attached to their feet and try to throw fucking barrels at you like they're playing Donkey Kong. Kidding me? After Godfrey claimed the land that the Stormhawk was seemingly guarding, this was where he had the castle of Stormvale built, which has a big ol' statue of Godfrey in it to honor the Lord. There was also Castle Morn down south, which Godfrey took over himself and I guess massacred a bunch of people in the process. There's a sword of all the swords of the fallen people that you can actually find there, which seemingly was forged because someone was very, very angry at Godfrey and wanted to avenge their fallen comrades. One of the other threats, though, to Marika's order, and a big one at that, was the army of fire giants. They were still around, and they didn't really appreciate the whole Erdtree just sprouting out of nowhere and those who worshipped and conquested for it to be prancing around the place acting like they were now the rightful owners of the entire lands between. The fire giants themselves had that insanely powerful flame crucible thing as well, a perfectly useful weapon for burning a giant golden tree. So Marika and her armies were definitely a bit paranoid. Godfrey led a huge war against them, and naturally, the fire giants fought back. In this war, Queen Marika was able to bring many allies to her side, including the trolls, descendants of the giants, which were just like, yeah, we like the Erdtree, so we're gonna fight for it now, as well as the Knights of Zamor, those people I briefly mentioned earlier that really hated the fire giants, and the fire monks, which were a coalition of people that used an incantation to protect Godfrey's army from the flame of the giants. There was apparently some kind of god called the Fell God, which existed inside the giants after Queen Marika herself fought said Fell God, but we don't really know much about its significance beyond that. After the armies of the Erdtree wiped out the fire giants with all kinds of methods, including impaling them with thorny stakes that went through their bodies, like, bro, what the hell? Only one fire giant remained, and he was just like, F you guys. And since Marika couldn't actually stop the insanely powerful flame that existed inside the crucible slash forge slash fire cup pod device thing, she cursed the dude with the eternal babysitting of it. The giants were dealt with, and that made Marika mildly satisfied, but not fully, I guess, judging by what happens later. During this new established era, as people began to accept the Erdtree and the lands between, it at least gave them something in return. in the form of holy sap that seemed to drip off and was collected by the people, having mystical, perhaps healing properties. As part of the Erdtree effectively began to establish real control over the lands, due to, of course, the actions of those who acted on it, like the Queen Marika and her Elden Lord Godfrey, this control would be ever strengthened by the children of the pair. Godfrey and Marika seemed to have about 3 kin around the same time. These consisted of Moog and Morgoth, who were known as Omen twins, which meant that they were kind of cursed with these horrible horns all over them and were banished to live in the sewers. This was going to have dire consequences, but I guess they just hated omens because they were reminiscent of the Crucible era. Regardless, Marika and Godfrey had another child named Godwyn at some point as well, which was kind of their star angel child. Godwyn the Golden was his title, and he helped to further establish control by this now golden lineage that he was a part of. See, as a result of being their kin, Marika's children were demigods, or in other words, half-gods, including Moog, Morgoth, and of course Godwyn. To tell you a little bit more about them, Moog was really pissed off about being banished to the sewers, so he turned to blood magic via the Formless Mother. Morgoth was like, I know they hate me, but I still love them. And Godwyn, well, he was just the special one and got special treatment. He seemed nice enough, though. Were there more children from Marika and Godfrey? Who knows? But for now, those are the 3 to be aware of. Alright, now if that was a lot to take in, I get it. Let's all take a deep breath so we can process all of the insane wizardry that just occurred. Let us now continue where we left off in the last chapter, with the continuation of the golden lineage and where things really start to pick up. Remember way back near the beginning when I was talking about the astrologers that came down from these snowy mountains to a western region that would later become Liurnia? Well, those people had progressed quite a lot since I last talked about them. There was the Carian royal family, and then there was the Academy of Raya Lucaria. They were separate initially, but one of the Carian royals, a woman named Rennala, brought the 2 factions together. She just had, like, ultimate riz. Rennala was seemingly a princess, along with her younger sister, R'hllana. Each of them had some kind of magical moon, meaning that they were moon twins. R'hllana would later take both of these for herself, but that's DLC territory. At some point, once the then established sort of golden order, golden lineage was in full force, the armies of Queen Marika tried to liberate or take control of Liurnia. But the prideful Liurnians would not have it. There was a huge war that commenced, and one of the big players in said war was a man that seemingly came out of nowhere, Radagon. This dude is really important. Perhaps coming into existence at the birth of the Golden Order configuration itself, he has a very strange connection to Queen Marika. Radagon himself is Queen Marika, embodied as another person, in this case, a man. How might this work? Did they do mitosis? No clue. Regardless, this Radagon of the Golden Order fought against Rennala in battle during the Liurnia Wars, and by the end of the Second War, yes, there was a second one, Radagon was just like, okay, I'm gonna make the war stop by drinking this so-called celestial dew at the Church of Vows and profess my love for Rennala, thus ending the wars and uniting both sides. And then he actually did it. Cool? So then both the people of Liurnia and the Golden Order were peacefully united, and everyone lived happily ever after. Oh wait, this is a FromSoft game. So Radagon and Rennala smashed. They had 3 kids, Radahn, Ranni, and Rykard. Radahn became a general of the Red Mane forces in Caelid to the southeast. Ranni took after her mother and studied sorceries, and Rykard went on to become a justiciar who led inquisitors that tortured those considered heretics to the Golden Order. Speaking of the Golden Order, remember the Elden Lord Godfrey? Well, he was starting to lose his grace around this time, which Marika seemed to create when gold arose in that cursed portal of bodies. Grace was extended by Marika to everyone except the Hornsent, and eventually was temporarily taken from the Tarnished, which Godfrey was becoming. After fighting Marika's wars and pretty much cleansing the land of all major conflict, the hue from Godfrey's eyes started to fade. As his usefulness came to an end, Queen Marika had a plan. After questioning the Greater Will and the meaning of everything, she seemingly wanted to test it. She may have believed that bonds were to be broken and hardships had to be endured to fully understand the truth of the Greater Will. To test said beliefs, she divorced Godfrey and sent him away, along with his tarnished descendants. Marika's plan is repeated by this woman named Melina as follows.
In Marika's own words, my lord and thy warriors, I divest each of thee of thy grace. With thine eyes dimmed, ye will be driven from the lands between. Ye will wage war in a land afar, where ye will live and die.
So with Godfrey banished, along with apparently all of his tarnished warriors, descendants, or whatever homies he left with, and as a lot of the major conflict was totally put to rest, things were chill, until the lands between was shocked with a huge scandal. Radagon left Rennala. Why exactly? Well, remember, Radagon and Marika were possibly the same being at this point somehow, just split into a guy and a girl. So Marika wanted to merge back into Radagon, which would explain why he suddenly left Rennala. If you recall, he kind of came out of nowhere in the first place back when he led the people into battle while fighting against the Carians, initially, inevitably later uniting the two houses. Regardless, after leaving Rennala, Radagon married Queen Marika and had kids. Is this asexual? I don't know. And if there weren't already too many demigod names starting with M, oh boy.
I thought Melania, is that the fucking girl I'm talking to at
Red
the
hair.
campfire?
No,
Who's she?
it's Melina.
Dude, Melina, Melania, America. How the fuck is anyone supposed to fucking remember this shit?
I pray to the outer gods so you don't have half as hard of a time as I did trying to desperately remember the names of these characters early on in my journey as a wee little tarnished. Marika and Radagon's new kids, a set of twins, were kind of weird. Miquella was cursed with eternal squeaker syndrome. He looked like a kid for life and wanted to help his sister. Said sister, Melania, was cursed with scarlet rot inside of her and cared very much about protecting Miquella. That said, apparently in Elden Ring, you should not have twins, especially not with yourself. Marika also had a son named Mesmer as well, and also seemingly had another child named Melina. There's no direct named evidence for this whole Melina theory, but with the Erdtree DLC and Mesmer's item description saying he had a little sister, it is now more heavily implied than ever. Melina, most likely, went on to become the Glowmite Queen, which I'll talk about a little later on. Back to Mesmer, though. Like Melania and Miquella, he was also cursed. Mesmer had a writhing snake inside of him, and Marika decided, I'm gonna pluck out your eye and put in place a golden eye, which will seal your stupid snakes inside you and make you chill. But apparently this wasn't enough to stop the snakes from coming out or something, so out of fear of this cursed snake shit, she sent him to the land or realm of shadow where he was to tie up some loose ends. Remember the horrible Horns End people and massacred Marika's people long before she became a god? Well, they were still alive, and she really thought that they shouldn't be alive anymore because of what they had done in the past, and were maybe even still doing to a degree. So to kill two birds with one stone, she sent Mesmer to the region she had arisen from with an army, and utilizing these huge fire golems that wielded a very powerful flame, one which was powerful enough to burn body and soul, Mesmer basically burned the ever-living shit out of the Hornsend people and torched their main capital city, Bellerat. In this process, though, Marika seemed to seal off the region, making it permanently in the shadow of the Erdtree, and now a very difficult place to travel to because it's as if the landmass was a part of the land between 1 second and then the next it was just poofed, becoming the realm of shadow. I guess going with Mesmer on the crusade was a few people, including Rennala's sister, Rellana, who very much wanted to help Mesmer massacre the Hornsent and was considered his blade or protector, but also coming with him was a guy named Gaius, a friend of Radahn, who was the leader of Mesmer's men, his commander. And real quick, speaking of the men that made up this army, many of them were on board with the massacre genuinely, but then a lot of them may have been sent there against their own will, with some suggested to have been prisoners. This would totally make sense, since not only would the whole crusade be killing two birds with one stone, it would be killing three, because Marika would be first killing the Hornsent, second getting rid of her very dangerous child Mesmer, and third banishing a load of prisoners or unwanted people in the lands between. So after Marika did this, things may have been pretty chill, but the reality of the golden lineage meant that one day she would be replaced, probably. One potential candidate to replace her was Miquella, who was an Imperium. He made a vow to his half-brother, Radahn, saying this:
Lord brother, I'm going to be a god. If we honor our part of the vow, promise me you'll be my consort. I'll make the world a gentler place.
Radahn probably seemed pretty cool to Miquella, and in appearance he was probably just as young as Miquella at this point, making them very obvious peers. And again, half-brothers. Radahn was generally a nice demigod, and I could see why Miquella would respect him heavily, but to go as far as wanting him to be Miquella's Elden Lord / King Consort whenever Miquella eventually would become a god after becoming an Empyrean, that's something. What exactly are the terms of this vow? Unexplained. Was Miquella really into guys? Unexplained. Will there be an uptick of Rule 34 results after people fully catch wind of this? Unexplained. One thing we can almost definitively say for sure is that Miquella loved his sister a lot and was very invested in trying to find a cure for her kind of major problem. Melania also loved Miquella very much and devoted herself to being his blade or protector, with the two of them compensating for each other's flaws. They were both candidates for godhood, Empyreans, as so many of the offspring of Marika seemed to be, including, once Marika later married Radagon, Ranni. Remember the character I talked about like over 5 minutes ago that I barely elaborated on? Well, Rani, the sister of Radahn and Rykard, became an Empyrean once her father Radagon married Marika. So both she and Mikola and Melania, now Rani's half-siblings, were all given 2 fingers to help guide them in their potential ascendancy to godhood. The 3 were also presumably given shadows, and we know that Rani's shadow was a wolfman dude thing named Blythe. Taking a step back from the Golden family, though, for a minute, we ought to mention the Godskins, because they're pretty important both as a player, holy shit, this fight sucks, and in the grand scheme of the lore. To put it simply, remember Mesmer's sister Melina? Well, she is very likely, due to a shit ton of evidence, the Gloam-Eyed Queen. Said queen was known to be an Empyrean chosen by the Fingers, which would definitely further add to the evidence of her being Melina. But also, for whatever reason, Marika seemed to cast Melina out. I guess she was cursed too. So if she was kicked out of the royal family and she also was the Gloam-Eyed Queen, then she was later responsible for some pretty crazy stuff. See, the queen made these things called Godskin apostles, followers that were made from weird artificial means, and they wanted nothing more than to slay gods, wielding the power of destined death. They primarily used a black flame incantation in combat, which, due to the destined death imbued in it, was able to slay gods. Who they slayed? I'm not sure. We may or may not have the actual names of these gods that they apparently slayed and may or may not have made clothes out of, but they're pretty menacing nonetheless. I mean, just look at this midsummer looking ass village later on. Like, what the f is this? With the Godskins being a threat to the Golden lineage, Marika sent her shadow, Malekith, to destroy them. Malekith fought and killed the Gloam-Eyed Queen, or if Melina is in fact the same person, burned her but didn't kill her entirely, because somehow in the way future when you're actually playing the game, Melina is a spirit ghost lady thing that follows you around and talks to you. Anyway, to further prevent anyone from wielding Destined Death to kill any more gods, Marika sealed away the Destined Death rune itself, which was previously part of the Elden Ring configuration, with Malekith to guard it, sealing the rune in his sword. With the Destined Death rune then removed from the ring, this essentially created an entirely new configuration or order of its own, which may have been Marika and the Fingers' goal all along, what we refer to as the Golden Order. Was this Golden Order gonna last long? Maybe, or maybe if you're Rani, you really don't want to become a god and despise the fact that you're an Empyrean and decide, hey, I'm gonna kill my half-brother and do this insane satanic ritual to ensure that I don't have to remain beholden to this stupid god crap. So, remember Godwyn, Marika and Godfrey's son? Well, he was just doing shit, being a pretty cool guy, before these Black Knife assassins who were hired by Rani to go and steal a shard of Malekith's sword came and shanked Godwyn with this Destined Death-infused shard, carving a piece of this death symbol circle into him, while Rani, on the other hand, also had that symbol carved into her, which caused an insane magic reaction that can only be described as needlessly complicated. Godwyn seemed to lose his soul, while his body was still a vessel for a soul, which is apparently really bad when combined with the whole Destined Death thing. And then Rani, on the other hand, kept her soul but lost the tether to her human flesh, at which point she put her soul into a doll's body. Godwyn's body, on the other hand, was discovered and mourned by the Golden family, being buried at the roots of an ancient great tree underground. Unfortunately, while Rani's body is just hanging out on top of a tower still, Godwyn's body became an eldritch horror because of the circumstances of his death and spread an entirely new thing called Deathroot all around the lands between. Following the tragic death and spreading of her son, Marika was distraught. Also, the people of the lands between were like, yo, demigods can die? And a lot of chaos broke out. There was a decent amount of fighting. Demigods like Mikola outright abandoned the Golden Order fundamentalism, which was basically him going, I never cared about this shit anyways, I prefer more overt incest. And everything else was just getting to a breaking point before Marika decided, hey, I'm gonna literally shatter the Elden Ring, which she then proceeded to do.
Okay.
To recap this insane and very long chapter, Marika shrouded what seemed to be part of the previous Lands Between in shadow, the shadow of the Erdtree. Some people stayed in the Land of Shadows, some people stayed in what we know as the proper Lands Between. The demigods mostly all just seemed to be trying to chill out and get by, while Mikola was doing some really weird shit, making vows to do some incest stuff with Radahn, which may or may not have been consensual, while Mesmer was sent off to massacre the Hornsent people, which probably had it coming considering what they did to Marika's people back in the day. Then Godwyn was assassinated, Rani became a doll, and Marika shattered the Elden Ring, marking the end of an era and the beginning of a new one, the Shattering. With the Elden Ring shattered, some of the demigods got their hands on different pieces of it, and ultimately none could agree on who should be the Elden Lord and succeed whatever soulless creature America/Radagon was at this point. The demigods fought harder than the 11-year-olds competing to type first on every YouTube video. To start, Rykard, if you recall, Renala and Radagon's son, was suddenly very against the Golden Order, or whatever was left of it, fighting wars to become the new Elden Lord by force. He would eventually retreat to his volcano manor and get eaten by a giant snake that whispered sweet nothings to him. His brother Radon, on the other hand, still appreciated the Golden Order and resided in Caelid, which was experiencing its own issues with scarlet rot outbreaks. His sister Ranni, now a literal doll, was just chilling in a tower with an ultimate plan to follow through on her fate, which was apparently to remove all control from the gods and allow the stars to determine things, and with her connection to the Astrological Society being Renala's daughter, that kind of makes sense. But what about the other demigods? Well, early in the Shattering War, one of Godfrey's old descendants, Godfroy the Grafted, actually tried his hand at attacking Landale, because he wanted to be Elden Lord, I guess, but he failed miserably and was imprisoned. And then his son, Godric the Grafted, ran like a coward, eventually making it over to Stormvale Castle, which he kind of took over. But while Godric is a meaningless character that nobody likes, Miquella and Melania, during this period of the Shattering Era, were doing some stuff to prepare for when the vow Miquella made way back when would eventually bear fruit. See, Miquella saw what happened to Goblin, with his body having just been spread through the lands between and being capable of manifesting as more than just a body. Miquella also seemed to know at this point a funny, quirky little fact about the Realm of Shadow, which was that to actually enter now, to go to the place yourself, you had to absolve yourself of your flesh, somehow basically doing what Ranni and Godwyn seemed to do in their own ways. So Miquella came up with an idea, or a way to get to the Realm of Shadow, because of how important it was to his overall plan, to become a god and to have Radon be his consort. He first created something called the Erdtree by taking an Erdtree sapling, watering it with his own blood, and growing it into a gigantic, sprawling Eden of empathy, or so you'd think. This Erdtree was actually a place for people to sort of chill out and escape from being hunted or chased down by the Golden Order, for example. This was a pretty popular place for the Albanurics, which were like these sort of artificial GMO creatures, kind of like the Godskin Apostles we talked about earlier. Miquella's sister, Melania, also hung out here at the Erdtree, where Miquella worked on methods to try and cure her scarlet rot with things like unalloyed gold, which helped to treat the disease to a degree. Miquella eventually had enough dilly-dallying around trying to save Melania and decided, hey, it's time we do that thing I made the vow for a long time ago, and Melania was just like, sure. Miquella cocooned himself in the Erdtree, which rid himself of his body, maybe, sort of, while making it have some usefulness to the tree and the people there, but while also detaching his soul to be able to get to the Shadow Realm. And around this time, he also sent
I ask thee thankful of that is all that. I ask thee thankful of that is all that.
Greetings, are you here for spirit? I can hear it from the howling, and you should keep your distance. I know you.
Well, I took you no matter. Lay out your arms then.
Greetings, are you here for spirit? Greetings, are you here for Greetings, are you here for Greetings, are you here for spirit? Greetings, are you here for spirit?
Back already, no matter.
trying to save Melania and decided, hey, it's time we do that thing I made the vow for like a long time ago. And Melania was just like, sure. Mikola cocooned himself in the Erdtree, which rid himself of his body, maybe sort of, while making it have some usefulness to the tree and the people there, but while also detaching his soul to be able to get to the Shadow Realm. And around this time, he also sent Melania to attack and fight Radahn, I guess to the death over in Caelid. Scarlet Rot was pretty bad over there, and Melania was like, hey, so I'm gonna get you. And Radahn was like, nuh-uh, you're disabled. And Melania was like, I'm gonna stab us both now. Then she was like, Mikola awaits the promised consort. Before turning into a giant flower blossom and corrupting the out of Radahn, destroying his cognition and stripping him of all but his body, his anorexic horse, and a now very tormented mind. Melania went into like a coma and was carried back to the Erdtree by one of her soldiers, and that was that. There are so many questions. Like, did Radahn actually agree to be Mikola's consort? Which, if you don't know the definition, that means spouse, basically. So, did this dude actually consent to being in an incest relationship with his half-brother that also looked eternally like a young child, or was he manipulated? We know that Mikola can absolutely manipulate people to do his bidding by what happened next, which was that after Radahn got completely obliterated and basically turned into a Scarlet Rot zombie, Mikola was like, alright, I need a temporary sugar daddy to do some other stuff so that Radahn can ultimately be my real sugar daddy. Which takes us to Moog. Oh, poor Moog. You might not actually be the Moog Lester that we thought you were.
They just kept calling me the Moog Lester. But finally people know the truth about the Mika Lester.
Remember this guy? This was one of Godfrey's sons that he had with Marika, one of the banished Omen twins that worshipped blood magic, and he happened to be perfect for manipulation because unlike his twin brother Morgoth, who defended the Golden Order with every fiber in his being, Moog was pretty vengeful seeming. At least he thought he had better ideas than what the Golden Order was all about. Regardless, Mikola seemingly manipulated Moog into taking Mikola's cocoon out of the Erdtree, placing it into Moog's own underground temple known as Mohgwyn Palace, and guarding it. Why did Mikola want Moog to do this? Apparently, so that one day someone might come along and kill Moog, allowing Mikola to use Moog's demigod body, yoink it into the realm of shadows somehow, and pair it with Radahn's soul, reviving him with a new body in the Shadow Realm. Yeah, it's like simple, right? If you're also so incredibly confused by this story that you've completely lost any hope that the writers were not snorting copious amounts of cocaine while coming up with this shit, I am right there with you. Mikola's plan to eventually revive Radahn in the Shadow Realm, make him his Elden Lord, and become Radahn's god in the process seemed to pretty much solely hinge on some random bozo coming up and slaughtering zombie Radahn and Moog. This plan also very much kind of aligned with Marika's, or was similar to hers when she went through the process of shattering the Elden Ring. See, she wanted to allow the Tarnished to return to the Lands Between by extending grace to them, which, if you recall, she took away a long time ago. Were the Tarnished a backup? It kind of seems like they were, in case the whole not-so-golden order were to fall apart. So, it's time to meet you. You, the player. Yes, you. You're Tarnished. Welcome back from being banished away and having your poor grace taken away from you. There are many like you who have returned to the Lands Between to seek the Elden Ring and become the new Elden Lord. Many who tried, all so far who have failed. But you'll be different, because this is a video game and no matter how many times you die, you will always try again. Sweatier than before, but don't let that get you down. Your character wakes up after being extended this grace and making some kind of travel to the Lands Between through a metaphorical or real fog. Just to be clear, there are other continents on the planet the Lands Between takes place on. And for example, if you choose the Samurai loadout when creating your Tarnish, you'll find that they come from the distant Land of Reeds. Whoever your character is though, they'll eventually stumble their way outside of a church-like building and take their first steps into the Lands Between. Guided by your grace, you learn the layout of this place, meeting its inhabitants, a now shattered, lost, and broken people. You fight monsters, all kinds of creatures of strange origin, yet many of them give clues to the lost, rich, ancient history left behind. Eventually you fight bosses and start to make your presence known in this land, all the while being guided by Melina, the strange, confused spirit that seems to be left behind from the Glow-Eyed Queen. After slaying dragons, shard-bearers, and even demigods, at some point you have a choice to make. Go straight to where Marika and Radagon are conjoined, or locked away in the Erdtree,